The Ensō philosophy is just that there's no beginning, there's no end.
It was an epiphany of what truly life is all about.
I really embraced my own understanding when I went to Japan.
I've always wanted others to do well.
A tree doesn't eat its own fruit. It cultivates its wisdom and gives it away.
I think that was red flag number one right there. But my greatest fear was
The Ensō philosophy is just that there's no beginning, there's no end, but that we continue learning and being open to those experiences, and that life, the impermanence and its imperfection to learning. I've been writing a book this entire time.
Nice.
And so in that full year of writing the book, I started to really go into like scientist observation. What can I learn from this mode? And in everything that I would see, I would turn it into what can I learn from this? Where are opportunities where I can share this with other people and put it all in the book? And then all of a suddenly I'd been writing for a year and had a vague idea, but it didn't all come together until November. And then it was like just spewed out. I was like, the imagery of the tree. And it was a friend who had said to me that a tree doesn't eat its own fruit. And it just clicked on me. I was like, wisdom being your fruit that you cultivate to give away. And just that, you don't eat your own fruit. And so many people have so much wisdom, yet we think that we need tenure. We think that we need to be someone of authority in order to give that wisdom away. And when we really start taking the mindset of like, no, there's wisdom all around you. It's whether you open your eyes to really look and connect and learn and shift that perspective that there's wisdom all around you.
That is beautiful, Annette. And I'll tell you why, because I think everybody who wants to go into coaching, into counseling, into advising, has that aha moment where something inspires them and they see the beauty behind it, they see the meaning behind it, and then that becomes the origins of their coaching practice. Even if they don't go into coaching, but the wisdom that you can share with others, you're right, doesn't have to come from somebody with $1 billion company. It doesn't have to come from someone who's been hyper successful in whatever field they were in. It can come from your elders. It can come from your friends. And this is sort of the impetus behind this podcast was I want to make it interesting, but it doesn't have to be somebody who has 1 million followers. It starts small and it starts with little pieces of wisdom. Now, other people may disagree with our missions, our visions, but at the same time, someone will find them valuable. And when you take a look at the best business leader books of today, so the Simon Sinek's, the James Clears, Scott Galloway's, you realize that what they're saying really isn't anything new. It's just the way it's packaged, how it's presented. And it's okay that it comes from someone of high standard. It's okay if it comes from, your next door neighbor, because it just triggers something in your brain to change the way you think, to change how you live your life from that moment on. And so I want to start there. I always like to understand people's backgrounds because it led them to this point where they want to help others, to be a coach, to be a leader, to help others be better in whatever form. So tell me about your background. If you're okay with, tell me a little bit about your childhood, what you think sort of formed your worldview, and then ultimately what you think led you to today.
Yeah, I love all that you're doing. So my upbringing, small town, Southern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario, tiny little town. My mother is Japanese, born and raised in Japan, moved to Canada in her 20s. And my father, Welsh Canadian, these crystal blue eyes. And he came from a family like his father was a senior accountant. My uncle was a principal. My father was tool and die for Lambton College. So growing up in a small town, my mom was the only Japanese in that town. And so that very unique upbringing of diversity in a very Christian. It was such a dynamic town because we were really close to an indigenous town,
Mhm.
and we were really that skilled workers trades town. And I'm very fortunate that I have a mother who is so incredibly resilient. And what she taught us growing up is like, be yourself in your individual. And she, what she could have done was taken her identity and been like, try to be like everybody else. But what she did is she taught us so much about our Japanese culture and our background, despite it not being anywhere.
Mm.
And that strength that we observed from her, she opened her own store. The very beginnings in the 70s, she would do these craft shows, and we would go with her and we would help her set up all the stuff. She would make these Japanese made little jumpsuits that everybody just loved. She would sell out all the time. And so that entrepreneurial spirit I really got when I was young, seeing my mother build and create her own store, her own journey for what she does. And it really wasn't until I really got into my later years in my 20s that I really embraced my own Japanese cultural and understanding when I went to Japan. And mine's real mixed because I really excelled in sports when I was young. I was a swimmer early age, and when I look back at the times when I was a swimmer, and I look at the times comparative now, I was an incredibly fast 11 and 12-year-old, but being in a small town, I didn't have that opportunity to go to big clubs and excel the way that I did. I played club volleyball. So uniquely, when I went to university, I actually played two varsity sports. I played varsity volleyball. I ended up leaving that team because it was a toxic team, and then went to varsity swimming, made the swim team, and came so close to nationals within my first year of swimming. So it was kind of fun and gave me my power. So when I went into university, I had this dream, I'm going to make it in the big leagues. And one small note, and mainly because it's relevant to you, Sean Sweezum, kicker,
Right.
NFL kicker, we were same graduate year. He was male athlete of the year. I was female athlete of the year. And sports and coaching and everything about professional sports at that time of my life, I just loved. And so I followed the path of like what I thought I should do, right? Get a job, work the ranks, keep growing. And I went into HR mainly because I love helping people. And so that HR side was like, I want to see you excel in your job. And I kind of took that sports mindset into director of people culture and helping executives and leaders grow. And I still see, what is it? Simon Sinek says, business is an infinite game,
Hmm. Right.
right? And it is, it's an infinite game.
Yeah.
And your mindset on into how you're going to win that game, who's leading, who's your coach, who's your assistant coach, who's leading the organization all really matter.
Yeah.
And so that's really my full in a nutshell, where I came to really be. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. And then I was like, nope, that's not my path. And I kept on coming back to, I want to be able to coach and lead people to take the best path that they feel for their whatever is fit for them.
It's interesting you say that because I feel like I've had the same path. And since as long as I can remember, I've always wanted others to do well. And this is why I dig a little bit deeper into, people who are leaders, people who are coaches, what their motivation is, but really where it stems from. And I love what you said about, obviously you were competitive growing up. The entrepreneurial spirit was in your family, lots of different things that revolve around collaboration, help, being helped, and then taking that into coaching. And I think that's where a lot of people who go into this profession, into coaching, it literally comes from just wanting to see others succeed. And that's how I feel, and it sounds like that's how you feel. And going into HR is a natural fit, obviously, for someone like that. But I can imagine there's some constraints around that, though. Being in a corporate culture, in a fairly tight business culture, how you're limited even in your role as HR leader. So maybe explore that a little bit and tell me how you feel how that was a good environment for you, but also something that maybe kept you from being what you truly wanted to go on to.
I spent 8 years in HR, Director of People and Culture, and I love working with those leaders. I love working with those people. But we know that in organizations, the key drivers are those people pouring their life into someone else's dreams and aspirations and vision and mission.
Mhm.
And I've been able to explore many different types of leaders, and I dive myself into books. I love reading books and I love understanding. And one book that really stood out for me was John C. Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. The one law that really stood out to me was the law of the lid. And the law of the lid really states that, like, doesn't matter how strong another leader in your organization may be, it will be capped by the most influential leader. Influential meaning, if whether it be the CEO who makes and runs the rules, or maybe a key executive manager who really is doing that. But depending on their leadership level, that doesn't matter how strong your leaders, it'll be capped by this. And what I saw then, where the mindset of those key drivers and key people would keep themselves small, even though they may have stronger leadership skills, but
Mhm.
they didn't quite know how to influence. They didn't have the power. They did not yet have the skills to really be able to grow beyond that. And that was my then heart. I was like, I don't want to work just for the organization. I got into HR because I love the people
Mhm.
and I want to be able to help the people still grow. And in the past year, with my writing, I really, it came to this beautiful imagery of the tree.
Mhm.
And in my own reading and learning journey, I never really found a cohesive framework that could tie it all together. Like the books from Mel Robbins, the Tasha Eurich, the Shane Parrish, and like Clear Thinking, Adam Grant, and all these things. They're all little tidbits and parts of leadership. And then it clicked to me, and I was like, the tree. And like I had mentioned earlier, a tree doesn't eat its own fruit.
Yeah.
It cultivates its wisdom and gives it away. But wisdom is created by lessons learned. And what I would start to see is their capacity to learn would often be very small because they're given their everything for an organization. And that framework to really be like, but you, and I'm going to say this, you as a tree are still growing and you can still grow despite someone else's lack of growth.
Yeah.
And the imagery of the tree then started to take root. And so those key roots of leadership I really saw, and as we learned in our coaching, like self-awareness, vulnerability, the roots of integrity, accountability, and those key roots that I started to read through all the different books that are the most important that we need to learn. And that was my motivation to really shift to now creating Ensō Mindset. And Ensō Mindset is my mindset. And it's still growing and evolving, but I felt value in having this visual metaphor which seems so organically real and holistic to support people in their own growth.
I want to go back to something you said about leaders in any situation, but the loudest people aren't necessarily the best leaders. Like the ones who project themselves as the leader are not necessarily the best ones. And what, in my experience at least, the best leaders that I've found are, I wouldn't call them quiet, but it's almost like they don't realize that they're leading. It's just so natural for them. Some of the teachers, the coaches, employers that I've had over the years, the ones that I wanted to, I always say I'll run through a brick wall for you. It's a football analogy, but it always seems to be those ones that were just unassuming, quiet. They listened, they observed, they let people be themselves for the most part. But it generally is that person that doesn't realize that they're a leader. And so I want to ask you, Annette, do you think leaders are born, created? Is it something that can be learned? Can people decide to become leaders?
Oh, this question.
Mm,
Um, what I aim with what I'm writing right now and what I'm putting out and what my belief is that leadership needs to be redefined
mm,
and not in the traditional titles and what traditionally of you have a team of 30, you are a leader. And redefine it to that there is a leader in every one of us.
yeah, yeah.
And whether we're leading ourselves or we're leading our family or you're leading your friend. And then it shifts it to your leadership is your growth. And when you continue to grow, you then influence and going back to the metaphor of the tree,
Mhm,
trees actually share resources.
mhm,
And their network of roots. And when they start to grow and cultivate their roots, then they can share resources more easily. And much the same as leaders being able to grow their own leadership so that they can share and grow their roots deeper. And in that metaphor I use of your roots will continue to grow, but your branches can only extend as deep as your roots go.
mhm.
And so that branch that you extend out to another colleague, a friend, a family member, those branches. So I'm going to use, let's use courage, right? So you cannot extend a branch of courage if you don't have a root cultivated to support that branch.
Mm,
And the more we become aware of what roots we have or what we don't root, then we can then start being more aware of like, what do I need to grow to start leading myself, start leading my family, start leading my coworkers into growth and whatever productivity may mean, whatever achievement means to you.
what are some of the personality traits of a good leader?
Well, are you okay if I talk in terms of values
Yeah.
versus personality traits? Because I don't think a personality trait defines a leader. Because as you're saying, the quiet person, the loud person, intrinsic, I feel that I'm going to quote Malcolm Gladwell,
Mm,
and he has this one interview, I believe it was actually with Adam Grant, where he talks about his mother, that she had this belief that your identities could change throughout your life and what you clung onto in those different identities.
yeah.
And just the same as Adam Grant talks about not letting your beliefs become so concrete, but then to take it into values to allow yourself to grow, because it's often beliefs can keep us in a box versus being more curious to what actually is leading. So I'm gonna kind of counter. I don't believe that it's just in characteristics, but I believe it's in the values that you then create as part of your identity. Because it is that root of value is so strong in you that it's a part of you and it's a way of being.
Beautiful. Thank you for challenging me on that. So let me rephrase the question. What does a good leader need to do today to make their teams successful?
I've been writing here, and what I really narrowed down to that question, and that is curiosity.
Mm,
And I write that the first root out of a seed is curiosity.
okay.
And that first root then, as any leader to grow, is get curious to then not to assume. My father used to have this written on our whiteboard at home as like, do not assume because you make an ass out of you
You and
and
me.
me. And he
Yeah.
had that. It's like burned in my head of like, don't assume, right? and to get curious to understand, because it is when we assume about people that we don't really connect with them to truly understand what it is that drives that person that you want to connect with and truly understand, to motivate them and to so on. So that root of curiosity and bringing your own unique personality and being okay with whatever your uniqueness is, because that's what makes you so you. And the one feeling that exuded the most energy, and that being authenticity.
Yeah.
And when we truly are, we're without any of the filters. That's what gives your seed the energy to grow, is when you can be so true to your authentic self and feel so strong. And then that energy then creates synergy.
Yeah.
Right. And then that alignment starts to happen and finding. But when we get curious and we ask those questions and we have the space to be vulnerable and learn about others to understand them so that we can collaborate more.
Hmm. I went back to when you talked about curiosity, I went back to the Ted Lasso episode, be curious, not judgmental. And that's basically what you were saying. It's be curious, don't just assume.
Yeah.
There's a story behind everybody, whether it be in that day or their lifetime. And to be a great leader is to, you don't have to dig that deep, but you have to understand that there always is something there. And I go back to my teaching days, when I was a high school teacher, and I have a lot of regrets in the way I handled, the kids that I led, that I coached and taught, because I thought my goal was to educate them to become ready for university. And I would get frustrated and angry with those kids who didn't put the work in, which leads to effort over results, but didn't put the work in, falling asleep in class, maybe being a bit of a shit disturber. It took me leaving teaching to look back with experience now and go, that kid, what was happening behind closed doors? Like, what was happening when they left that classroom, went to the next class, and then even when they went home, right? And I have, I don't want to, and I don't know if I want to call it regrets because it makes it sound really negative, but I do know that I would be a much better teacher today than I was 25 years ago, because I was judgmental. I judged every kid the second they walked in the classroom by the way they were dressed, by their work ethic and everything. And instead of just being curious and trying to understand. And I think in today's work world, um, it's 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 so hard for leaders to build that relationship with, especially if they have large groups of people that they're in charge of. But I think there's a way for them to be authentic, as you said, and show that genuine authenticity that brings out in others the real them, their genuine and authentic self. And it's so hard to, especially for I'll say for Gen Z and millennials, to try and be authentic and genuine these days, because all of social media and society tells them to be something they're not. And that's what I think creates some struggle in the workplace, between boomers and Gen Xers and Gen Zs and millennials. I think it's what a lot of people struggle with, but I think that is a great message. I think it is. I think, when you finally learn to be comfortable in your own skin and your own genuine, authentic self, and I've had to learn that, and it's only been recently that this has happened, um, you will attract the people that you were meant to attract. You will find your tribe. You will find those people that have similar likes and interests, and people that just love you for who you are. And I think that's a great message, Annette, when you said that, the best leaders first and foremost are curious and are authentically genuine.
I believe the mindset, and we know this, a mindset of evolving and always growing is very important. And the greatest leaders, I think, despite the age of them, um, are ones that have evolved with times and what's going on, right? That's what makes them, they're always changing and they're always growing.
Yep.
Those leaders who have a very fixed mindset, this is the way it's always been done, this is the way I'm gonna do it, you
Yep.
realize you're now stopping growth. You're stopping growth for your company, you're stopping growth in many different forms. And it is about the mindset, like Carol Dweck's like growth mindset. And I know that there's many people that just kind of shut that down because it's overused and not in a way of being. And that's what I really write about of what the Japanese teach us is that it's in a way of being, not just an app, not just a concept, not just buzzwords, but being it every day. Meaning you wake up and like, okay, what am I going to achieve? What am I going to do different today? What's still showing up for me that I need to learn from and turn it into wisdom?
Mhm.
And what skills am I going to further cultivate to continue growing?
The growth mindset concept, which is what I base my philosophy around of effort over results, and understanding the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset. I think the ones that are the best leaders and coaches, even in their 50s, 60s, 70s, are the ones that always have just evolved and been open to change and adaptable, and they're constantly curious and learning. And it is that fixed mindset of the business owner that says this is the way we've always done it, that it's like they stopped watering the tree.
Totally. Yeah,
It's
they
dried
stop
out.
growing and they're
Yeah.
going to become brittle and break.
And for a lot of them, I think it's a fear too, Annette. I think a lot of business owners are fearful of the change because these are people that literally, for a lot of them, started it out off the backs of their trucks, out of their garages, out of their homes, in a one room store, and now they're afraid of change for fear of losing that. There's a lot of fear there, and I think that is, I don't know if that's something that can be changed. Well, sorry, it can't. They have to want to change that,
Yes.
and
It's their decision to
it's
change that.
it's when
Like, hey, I want to grow.
it's when the fear and pain of staying the same outweighs the fear and pain of making the change itself. And I think about people that I know personally in my life that I have been a coach from day one. I swear I have been, and I always want to help others get better, and I always want to support them. And it's like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you read this book? Have you tried this technique? And it took me until like these past 3 to 5 years, especially with raising my children, to learn to let them find it for themselves. You can lay a few breadcrumbs here and there to guide them, but at the same time, you just got to let them make mistakes, fall on their face, realize that that was a wrong path, and now they need to take a different path. And then it goes back to, as recently within the last month, hearing more about Mel Robbins' let them theory. It's so beautiful because it's so simple. And what I realized in raising now my adult children, who are 24 and 22, is for almost their entire childhood, I never let them. And I have so many regrets there too. And I know as parents, we always have regrets, right? We always say I could have done that differently, and they my child would have been better. But it goes back to our has to be so great that you have no choice but to make a change or decide to make a change. And in the effort over results philosophy, it's just taking that first step. It's not about eating the whole elephant at once. It's just being willing to do the same thing over and over and over again, consistent habits, James Clear, atomic habits, daily, daily, daily. And you see this growth pattern that's slow, real slow, incremental, incremental. But then all of a sudden, you get that compound interest that just, you get that breakthrough.
Yeah. Well, and I almost want to go back to as well talking about the fear and that mindset. There's something that always I love the Queen's quote of nobody has a monopoly over wisdom. And Socrates says the same thing of you always can grow and learn more. And that has always been my mindset of getting so curious and being like, what else can I learn from this? But to go back to fear,
Mm.
um, and I had read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill.
There you go.
So Think and Grow Rich, he has a whole chapter about fear and the different types of fear, but more or less to dive into that fear rather than allowing it to stop your own progress and your own growth. And so what we see so many people of like, that's a fear. I don't want to touch it. And instead, if you then go, what is that fear? Where is that fear deriving? Is it my fear or is it someone else's fear? And if it's someone else's fear, then I mean, let that go. But if it's our own fear, then break it apart. What is that fear that's holding you back, and break it apart and start to learn from it.
Yeah.
And as I see it, is like break it apart and understand, because if it's holding you back, then you have to understand it and turn it into a learning. And then what values, what roots are you going to start growing to overcome that fear? And it is our own judgment and our own belief that often holds us back and deflates it.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
I remember distinctly filling out a, it was an exercise about, what are your limiting beliefs? And gosh, Annette, I had a hard time writing anything down because like, well, I don't think I have any. And I think that was red flag number one right there. Um, but then I realized, and I do, recommend that people, if they can find the resources, to find someone to talk to, a counselor, therapist, whoever it is that you can just sit down and talk to once a month, and to talk about those things like fear. And I want to touch on that a little deeper, because I know that for myself, almost everything I've done in life, if I reverse engineer it back to the motivator, the intrinsic motivator that started it, it was a fear. So I loved what you said there, because I think everybody has that. Nobody is without fear. Nobody has a completely clear mind that helps them understand exactly where they want. Everybody is motivated by something. And when we say fear, it's not I'm scared of that. It's just it's an uncomfortableness. It's a discomfort in that situation. And so for myself, and I've spoken on stage about this, growing up in poverty, not literally, my mother, single mother, raised three of us on social assistance. And my greatest fear was then putting my children through that same type of childhood. And so all of my motivation in life has been around providing, making sure others are safe, making sure they're protected. Even the position I played in football was to protect the quarterback. Um, but it does come from that fear. And I think if everybody explored that, they would find out more about themselves. But I go back to what I said earlier as far as coaching goes, is that there's some people that just don't want to be coached. But I can almost guarantee you I know why. Because they don't want to talk about their fears. They don't want to talk about past traumas, past incidents in their life that have created who they are today. And so they just keep putting one foot in front of the other, going forward, and ignoring that which would make them better.
Every emotion that we feel and understanding, and I almost want to say, like, we need to start building our emotional skills in emotional strategies, so that when fear comes up, or when avoidance comes up, when procrastination comes up, any one of those emotions that show up, they're an indicator telling you something, that there's something there to learn, whatever it may be. And you can either choose to avoid it, like, not today, or you can dive into it, break it down, understand it, and then grow from it.
Yep.
And that is what makes us human, right? And we see that individuals that suppress it, well, it only comes out in different ways if you're going to suppress it. And to then go, okay, that showed up, learn to name it, learn to understand it, and then have a strategy for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a philosophy that's only really been espoused here in the last decade. The concept, certainly when I was growing up, I mean, the concept of exposing your feelings and embracing your emotions and really understanding them and learning was all psychotherapy. And that's why we had to break through the mental health stigma, for people to be able to talk about things like that. And now it seems like it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And I think it's important, like I said before, for people to talk to others about those things.
Emotions and environment that happen are my metaphor of the weather.
Hmm.
So when you can observe them and understand them, the weather's always going to come. It's going to rain, it's going to storm, it's going to be cloudy, it's going to be sunny. And when we shift the perspective and framing to not our identity, it's something that happens. right? Then it allows us to observe them and then understand it. Oh, if anger is the giant violent storm that's going to come through, then we then build strategies go, I'm going to deepen my roots because this storm is coming through. I'm going to deepen my roots so that it doesn't break me.
Mm.
And so I use it in the metaphor of the weather because when you can observe your emotions, then you don't take it as part of your identity. It doesn't take it as part as you.
Explain deepen your roots. How do you do that? What does that mean?
That's learning. Learning. Yeah. So deepen your roots. So if you know, let's say you had, I'm going to use my son. My son's 6.
Okay.
And connection at the age of 6 is really hard. He comes home, he's really upset. And we sat for a while, and I've really been trying to teach him different things. And he just broke down and he was like, Mommy, these boys hate me. And I was like, help me understand. Like, I'm sure they don't hate you. And I have to put myself in, okay, he's 6, so he may not have the language. He
Right.
just knows hate.
Yep.
Hate is this feeling that I've named because that's all I know. And so I started hearing a little bit more. He's like, they never want to play with me and they go, so they hate me.
Yep.
And then it just clicked to me. And I was like, oh, sweetie, they don't hate you. I was like, you just haven't learned connection,
Mm.
how to connect with them. And so, how I see it, I'm like, we need to deepen your root of learning how to connect with people. Because he's an only child, he loves to play in his own world of imaginary. And I know this because I'm trying to constantly teach him. And so I gave him, I was like, is it because you want to play this and they don't want to? And he says, yes. And I was like, okay, well, you need to. So then my eyes are like the storm that happened. They didn't want to play. He felt whatever he felt. The only word he knew was hate.
Sure.
So then he thought they hate me. And so we're working right now on connection and kindness and being flexible. And those are those roots that we're working on right now for Elliot and his little sapling tree.
And that's beautiful. I love that. How you handled that. I, when my kids were 6, I would have handled that differently. And I'm learning. Let me ask you something about that example. But then you'd said something earlier about emotional intelligence and deepening your roots. The definition of that is to continue learning, right? And what popped up in my mind when you said that was, isn't it interesting that the people that yell the most, argue the most, their point is right, have the most storms, as you put it, in terms of anger, and are the ones that sometimes their roots are barely cutting through the dirt, meaning they tend to be the ones that are maybe less intellectual, maybe don't have the depth of education, and it's not anybody their fault of their own, but they're lashing out at that fear behind them that is, I don't know enough about this, so I'm just going to yell my opinion and hopefully I can bark other people off the stage, right? So is there a connection between emotional intelligence and intelligence?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's constantly where I love learning is understanding. And the word that comes up when you say all that is, so we have humility. And I think vulnerability and humility, and even in an age where I grew up and you grew up, is weakness, right? And Brené Brown breaks that amazingly in her book. But the opposite of humility is hubris.
Yep.
And that's really what shows up there of just thinking in the right. And it's something that I'm fascinated still and working in the manufacturing space with a male dominated workforce, that I'm very curious on. And mainly because it's like, man, if you just saw, just open your mind, just shifted one little bit, what it opens up more to you rather than feeling like you have to force your ideas down people's throats.
Mm-hmm.
And so my perspective is, or you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, I want to be able to educate and teach those people who do want to drink and learn. And I hope for any of the other leaders who, if that's their way of like, I'm just going to keep shoving my ideas down their throat until they listen and do as I told, and just go, okay, you can keep doing that. Or you can see that doing the same thing over and over again is not going to, like, that's the definition of insanity.
Yep.
But to shift your way of thinking and try something differently.
Yeah. You had said about, I mean, it's an age old, the metaphor of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I heard a great response to that on a podcast. It was, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But sometimes you need to just leave it alone and let it dehydrate.
Yes. Yes.
And what that means is, and this actually fits very nicely with Let Them from Mel Robbins, is I can tell my kids 100 times they need to, stop playing video games and study for that test. That, if they're going to be a better athlete, they really need to go to the gym more. All that. I can keep leading that horse to the water. I can drive them to the gym. Can't make them drink. I can't force their effort. I can't even sometimes get them to the gym or to their books or whatever. And my kids are older now, but this is what I struggled with when they were younger. And then it goes back to the let them of, you know what? Let them figure out what it is to not study and fail a test and maybe fail a class. But I was always so afraid of my child failing a class or failing in sports or failing in whatever, that I always led the horse to the water, and I was hoping they would drink. But I'm learning now, and I'll be a much better grandfather apparently because of it, is sometimes you got to let the horse dehydrate. It has to find out for itself that not changing has consequences. And that goes with business owners too. When you speak to business owners, and I said earlier, I can tell the ones that are coachable, but occasionally you get that one that's like, okay, fine, let's do it your way. I don't like that either. That's a huge red flag because I know they're not going to put a lot of effort into it. But I always say to them, what are the ramifications or results if you don't do something? Even if you don't use my services, if you don't do anything, what's going to happen? You're going to continue down the same road you've been going, which is no profitability and a turnstile of employees. But I think that's everything in life. And I think we can be there when people ask for help, but we can't make them come for help.
Yeah.
And
And you're doing a disservice to anyone by paving the road for them
yeah,
rather
for
than
sure.
let them take accountability
Oh,
and
believe me.
autonomy
Yeah.
to own and do it themselves.
Yeah. And that's where the effort over results comes from. I paved the road so cleanly for my daughter that she didn't know what to do when things, took a turn for the worse, when she was losing a competition. She was a swimmer too, like you. Um, and with our son, we changed the messaging a bit because he wasn't quite as talented. And I speak about this live, is that she was always told, you're a great athlete. You just broke a record. You just won that race. You just got an A on that paper. You got a gold medal. Way to go. And our son, who wasn't as talented as his sister, but then I realized later it's just that his sister was, above average. We kept telling, what, if you just keep working a little harder, buddy, keep putting effort in, you'll make it there. Going from, tier 3 hockey up to tier 1 hockey, took 2 years, and he's better for it. And we talk about our backgrounds and our childhoods and or even just like the past 20 to 30 years that led us to where we are as coaches. That's what led me to where I am as a coach today. And the effort over results philosophy is, we got to stop praising people just for the final outcome and for the result and for the destination. It's the journey where they learn. It's the journey where they win, because they're winning personally. They're learning something from every step. There's profit in all labor. And I want to go back to something that's on your website. It's a quote. It's not your quote, but it's: persistence will get it. Persistence will get it. Consistency will keep it, and gratitude will bring more of it. I've got it right in front of me right now, and I love it. I just love that, because that is exactly what I am trying to profess to leaders in the business community, leaders in the athletic community, parents, educators, is that we have to stop praising people only for the end result, because the mindset that gets fixed when they hear that is, if I don't get the end result, nothing else matters and I've failed. And so that's where my coaching philosophy comes from. So that speaks to everything we've been talking about. But now I want to go back to the Ensō mindset. What Ensō means, what is that mindset? I'm sure there's some similarities there and synergies between what I've just said and what your philosophy is as a coach. So what is it that your coaching philosophy brings to your clients, to the people you work with?
Yeah. So the Enzo, Japanese Zen and philosophy, and it's just an inspiration. My grandfather was a calligrapher, Japanese calligrapher. So I have up in this corner his calligraphy, and
Right.
actually my signature, the kanji, the Japanese kanji, is actually his handwriting.
Oh, right.
So the Enzo philosophy is just that there's no beginning, there's no end, but that we continue learning and being open to those experiences, and that life is in the impermanence and its imperfection to learning. But my main philosophy is Simon Sinek talks about finding your why and that golden circle of finding your why. And if I can use it a little bit differently, and that the Enzo mindset will help you align your why.
Mhm.
And when you know your calling and when you can start to identify what gave you energy, that this may be the organization, this may be the circle of the organization of your external world that you're living in. And then once you really define like what brings you that authentic energy and that calling and whatnot be, then you start to find alignment to of bringing it together of your external world matching your internal world. Now,
Mhm.
it's not going to be a fixed thing. It is actually constantly dynamic.
Yeah.
It may get closer, you may close that gap, but it may not be spot on. It may be spot on, but it's not going to stay spot on for very long, right? This is the cyclic nature of life, and that it is dynamic and it's never going to be spot on. So you have to be prepared to endure the weather, however it comes, changing environments, and tree still grows. Right? Like, and that's the mindset really of like be always growing, be always learning, be always curious, and at least know and identify what brings your energy and what you can contribute with that energy.
Wow. I every time you bring up the tree analogy, and you have a beautiful way of explaining it, the roots and the branches. Um, I'm so impressed by it, and because I know that it reaches me, and I know it's going to reach your clients and the people you work with and everybody that that watches this episode, and it's wonderful. And there is a genuine authenticity behind it when you say it and when you talk about it, and I think that's what people will be attracted to, whether it be your coaching philosophy and what you do with clients, or what I do, and why Mel Robbins kind of came out of nowhere, really. A lot of the great minds, thought leadership minds of today, they all started somewhere, right? But they
I
believe,
I
like, they believed
funny.
in it.
I I was an early TED Talk follower. I would
Yeah,
watch them religiously, early 2000s, and I actually remember her 2011 talk.
yeah.
And it was so good. She's so funny and she's so great.
Yeah. A lot of it is in the way it's presented. They always say it's not what you sell, it's how you sell it, right? But I mean, it's not
Yeah.
selling anything, because I mean, whether it's her or Anthony Robbins, all those people that give TEDx talks, and that's a goal of mine someday, is to be on a TED stage somewhere. But it's in the way they present. They are not presenting anything new. The concept of giving up control is Jungian. It goes back to philosophy and psychology from hundreds of years ago. Um, but it's the thing about it is that there are people out there that have never heard that. And there's people out there that have never heard the Ensō mindset. And there are people out there that have really never dug into the concept of effort being better than the result. And that's what's beautiful about what we provide to the world, what we're trying to provide to the world, and what all these speakers are providing to this world, is that you're opening it up to yet another new audience all the time. And there's always people out there that need help, that want to find something that inspires them. And regardless of what that is, and it might be the Ensō mindset, it might be effort or results, might be let them as long as it helped the handful of people that found it, saw it on an Instagram post, in LinkedIn or whatever, you feel like you've contributed, right? Um, and let me wrap up our conversation with that. I want to know what is your message to people? Um, who do you want to come to you? What are the types of people that you want to work with? That what they're looking for, and what do you offer to bring to them?
Yeah. M- Mainly it comes purely from my HR journey
Yeah,
and seeing these phenomenal managers, these people who give their every day in, day out to the organization. And maybe they feel that they're no longer growing, and not to then cap that, oh, I've stopped growing. I'll at least take this to retirement. To really challenge them of like, you still have so much and capable of so much more. Do not let an organization's cap of growing stop you from growing. And alternately too, if any executive who does lead people is like, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to be the one that then is capping my employees from growing because I have phenomenal people and I don't want them to leave. Then I want to shift that perspective to also say, then make sure you're growing.
right.
Make sure you're continuing to grow because your organization will grow with you.
Mhm.
And we often think we don't have time or capacity, but we do. And there's ways to shift that perspective to make sure that we can find that to always keep growing.
Yeah.
And that's my audience of just, you may feel like you're stuck with growing, or leadership needs to be slightly redefined, or you're like, I always felt like I was a leader, but I don't really think I am. And I want to say, yeah, you are. Yeah, you are a leader. Let me help you. And you'll discover your own unique experiences have leadership capabilities, and you have the opportunity to grow. And so the tree still grows.
Yeah, I love that. And we're gonna talk on your format, on your platform. And I'm looking really forward to that. I want to end with a couple things here. I want to end with a little bit of a quick question, initial response to these three questions. And then let's promote, let's let people know where you're at, where they can find you, and we'll go from there. But let's start with the three questions. Um, Best book you've read in the last year, last 12 months.
But Jeremy Karen Lima Worthy
Okay.
was a pivotal change for me.
Okay. Okay. If you could meet anyone right now, alive, someone right now in the world, who would you want to sit down and have lunch with?
Mel Robbins.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Um, who would you, what podcast are you listening to the most right now?
Mel Robbins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you mention that because when I found her, when I first encountered her, I think she was on Simon Sinek's podcast, but I was like, man, she's abrasive, like really, like kind of edgy, and then I realized, oh, she's just like my mom, right? Like she just kind of tells it like it is, no BS, and now I love her stuff, and I plan on reading the book. Okay, excellent. Well, thanks very much, Annette. This was one of the easiest conversations that I've had. You speak very eloquently and beautifully about what it is that you believe in, and I think that's going to attract a lot of people to you, whether they be clients or people who come to see you speak publicly. I know there's gonna be a lot of success in your future. Where is the easiest place for people to find you and more of what you're doing right now?
Um, my LinkedIn profile, Anette Nossiter. My middle name is Lun. It's Japanese, so Anette Lun. And you can find me on YouTube, Anette Lan. My website, www.ensomindset.com. And I'm on Instagram as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Annette. Have a great
Yes,
day.
thank you
And
so
we'll
much for this, Quinn. And I look
wonderful.
forward to our chats.
Talk soon.
Bye.